Hey everyone, welcome back.
Didn't take very long, you know. Some time has passed. We are here and ready to go for our next location, which is...
I think I'm the only one who knows what it is, aren't I?
Yeah.
That's so funny. We are going to Campio. We are going there for Beerlesque, which is a burlesque show by House of Hush. So we are super excited. So let's go check it out. And welcome back. We are here today at Campio with Delia Barnett, one of the performers from House of Hush, who's doing Beerlesque this evening. How are you doing tonight, Delia?
I'm good. How are you?
Awesome. I'm good, thank you. So can we start off with you just telling us a bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. My stage name is LeTabby Lexington, and I've been doing burlesque in Edmonton for about 13 years now. And I perform, MC, although not tonight MCing, produce, and create all sorts of different events. And then I also get to travel around internationally performing as well.
Wow. That must keep you very busy.
It does.
And so what led you to burlesque and performance?
So I felt like burlesque was sort of following me around. When I still lived in Niagara before I came here to go to the BFA at U of A, I got asked to join a burlesque troupe in Hamilton, and I thought to myself, oh no, not me. That sounds really scary. No, thank you. So I didn't do it. And then when I moved here, I reconnected with a friend that I did beginner ballet with as a child. And they, at the time, were one of the best burlesque performers in Alberta. And so we reconnected, and they taught me how to do burlesque in my living room. And then I did this weird performance art thing at Next Fest, and I met another person that was like, hey, like, have you ever thought about doing burlesque? And I was like, you know, maybe I should. So then I started doing with Ellen Chorley, we started Send in the Girls Burlesque. We did our first ever show in 2011 at Fringe called Tudor Queens of Burlesque, which was the story of Henry VIII's wives, using burlesque sort of similar to a musical, but instead of bursting into like song and dance, it was bursting into burlesque. And that show sold out, won like staff pick of the Fringe, and like got held over and all this stuff. So I was like, I guess this is what I do now. And so I've just like kept going ever since.
Wow. And so what was it exactly that kind of switched this is scary to maybe this is something that I should continue pursuing? Like, was it just people constantly asking you about it that you were like, maybe I'll give it a shot? Or
Well, also like 3 or 4 years had passed and I was a little more comfortable with myself. And yeah, just kind of that thing where like it just kept coming up, and I was like, you know, maybe I should try it and stop like shutting it down and be like, no, I'm too scared. I can't do this. So then I just like tried it out, and then honestly, I love it. It is the most comfortable I am on stage now, because it's kind of like that nightmare people have where they're like, I wasn't wearing clothing in front of a room of people. And not that we are not wearing clothing. There's pasties and undies. But people cheer for you and make noise, and like it kind of feels like almost like kind of like Gladiator-esque, and or kind of like what a rock star must feel like. So it makes you really comfortable and like feel really good. And then you can't hide anything that you think is a fault. So you just got to shake it. So it's like now it's really awesome. But yeah, when I first did it, I remember just like shaking like a leaf for the first like 2 minutes of the 3-minute number.
I couldn't imagine it while doing burlesque, because that's very, you know, you're being open, you're being vulnerable, like in any performance, but burlesque especially. So those nerves, what would you say are some of the things you do to like calm those nerves?
Well, I have a little grounding exercise that I learned from Mike Kennard when I took clown classes at U of A. And it's this funny little like grounding exercise of like think about your feet like just going into the earth and put your arms out and think about them like going around the earth and like I say high-fiving. I don't think that's his term. And then like arms overhead and think about yourself like shooting through the sky and like around a star and back down. And that usually sort of helps me sort of ground. I have a few other little like energy work things I like to do. But just sort of breathing and like, it's very rare now that I do get like unusably nervous before a show. It's more when I'm on like a giant stage where I'm like, oh great, one of my heroes is right over there. There's Dirty Martini. So that makes me nervous. But nowadays, like with the performance, like I just love it so much, and I look at it as an opportunity to just like bring joy to the audience and like make them smile and laugh and whatnot. So yeah, so it's also just sort of like experience of just doing it for a long time.
And so, to my knowledge, you've done many aspects of the arts, be it burlesque, theater. What would you say kind of started your love for the arts?
When I was really little, I have that classic thing where like there's videos of me in like my diaper dancing wildly to like Karma Chameleon. And then my mom put me into dance as a kid. Well, actually, first she put me into figure skating because she wanted like the cute photos, but I hated it and I fell down a lot and I cried, and so she took me out. But then she took me to the ice carnival where all the kids perform, and she was like, do you see how nice those costumes are on those children? That could be you if you would stop crying and just do it. And I apparently turned to her and said, well, I'll do it then. And then I was a figure skater until I was about 16 years old. So I joke that I was like, she kind of like caused my love of costumes, because a lot of burlesque is the costume. The costume really matters. So I was like, Mom, you kind of started me down that. And then in order to be a better figure skater, I had to take dance. So I took dance. I was doing dance and figure skating. And then when I stopped doing figure skating because my body couldn't handle the impact of the landing anymore, because I landed too many axles on my knees and got myself some nice scoliosis, I started a drama club at my high school and then just sort of went from there.
So you've been doing arts and performance for such a long time. Is there like one performance in particular that sticks out to you as maybe a favorite?
I mean, I do love Tudor Queens, my first ever burlesque show. I played Catherine Howard, who is my favorite of Henry VIII's wives. She's the fifth wife, beheaded. And I loved it. I played like, it was like a secondary host character, and she was just really like cheeky. And in that show we got to sort of like come up with what we wanted to wear and how we wanted to do everything. So I really loved that, and that was one of the ones that like really stands out as like super duper cool. But then I also have some like other experiences that I just really love. Like this summer I performed at K-Days at the Spiegel tent in Spiegel Spectacular and Burlesque Follies. And it was just so cool to be in a space that was 75 years old and just so ornate and gorgeous. Or one time in Knoxville, I got to perform at an old vaudeville theater that was over 100 years old. That was really cool. So I've had some cool experiences that way.
Have any of those ever been like, I mean, I'm sure they are super exciting, but like absolutely terrifying, of like flying to another place or like being on a ginormous stage and then just having to do a thing and people watch?
Oh yeah, the first time I went to a festival, I went to this festival called the Snake Oil Festival in New Orleans. It was my first festival all by myself, and I'd never been in New Orleans, and I'd never traveled like outside of Canada by myself. And so I was really just nervous and scared, and that was really terrifying. But it was a really good experience. I ended up befriending the other non-American performer in the show, this wonderful performer from like England, and we just like toured around the French Quarter and like did fun things, and I met a lot of people that I still talk to now, and like that was really cool. One of the other times was the very first time I emceed a big show was at the Edmonton Burlesque Festival. I was emceeing this thing called the Bunny Comp, which is for new performers. And I was so scared. And I remember just like feeling my body shaking and like literally standing in the wings being like, I either want to throw up or run away or both. And then I remember I went out, I did it, but I felt like my hands were just like shaking. And one of the judges that night was my friend who taught me how to do burlesque. And they grabbed the cards out of my hands and wrote a little note that they thought I was doing great and passed it back to me. And I kept going. And then now I've emceed like some massive events for like 400 people. And it's wild when it's like, I remember getting really nervous the first time I did it in the States because the references are different. And I remember making a mistake really early on in Nashville and being like, oh no, my toque. And the audience yelled out, what? Because the audience responds to you because we asked them to. And they're like, what? And I was like, oh, a beanie. Y'all wear beanies down here. And yeah, but that was scary too because it's like I don't have like the built-in rapport because I don't know anyone. I didn't know anyone in Nashville except for Freya West who brought me in. So I was like, oh, here we go. But yeah, it's really fun and awesome.
And is there a performer that you would like absolutely love to work with?
I've been really lucky that like I haven't like worked with, but I've been in the same show twice with Dirty Martini, who is my favorite performer of all time. Right now she's in Vegas doing Dita's show. Yeah, Dirty Martini is just the best. I would love to like collab with her. I got to perform with Angie Pontani, who I also really, really look up to. Yeah, I would love to work one day. There's this performer who does burlesque but also does like theater plays. Tamisha Harris, whose burlesque name is Tush, and she does Josephine the play. And also she's the former assistant choreographer of NSYNC. I love her so much, and we always like run into each other. We always hang out. Like I ran into her the last time I was in New Orleans, and like I would love to work with her so much because she's just such a sweet, talented, just wonderful human. Like I love her.
Speaking of burlesque, what would you say is maybe something you wish people knew, or maybe a big misconception that you would want people to like understand? Because you're speaking so highly of like other performers, and I'm sure they're amazing people, but I also know people make judgments and like kind of carry those. So if there was maybe something that you could say to people who like don't understand or something like that, what would you say?
One of the things that I find is people don't see it as a legitimate art form, or they think it's like this new flash in the pan sort of thing. But burlesque in North America specifically has like several roots, and one of them is coming over in like the 1890s with the British Blondes, and it was on Broadway and toured all over the place. And I think that's one of the things that people always sort of like look down and they're like, oh, you just do burlesque. Like, we work really hard, like especially with Fringe. Like we start rehearsals in May. Like we work for months to make sure everything's really great. The costumes are so expensive. They don't have to be, but some of them are. Like I have some that are upwards of $2,000, and usually that's like a growing thing, so I have to keep fixing them and adding more things to them. So the costumes are expensive, and the performers work really, really hard, and like there's stories, there's tales to it.
And how would you say it is being a performer and burlesque performer specifically in Alberta?
Well, when I started, the scene was really, really small. There was this really great troupe that still exists today that I get to perform with tomorrow, Capital City Burlesque, that I love so much. And then there was like a few other smaller troupes, but there wasn't really even like shows at the time for like soloists or anything. And I didn't want to join a troupe because quite a few of the troupes, they don't really pay the performers. It's more like fun. And coming from a theater background, I wanted to be paid. So it's like, how do I do this on my own? How do I make this sustainable? So I had to sort of like figure it out the hard way, because also there weren't classes and there wasn't a lot in place. I was lucky that this really great performer, Holly Von Sin, started this show called Sinners, Freaks, and Geeks and let me perform there like monthly. And so I sort of like built everything up that way. The Alberta scene has grown so much in the last like 13 years. It's gotten quite big and like such a great variety. And like what I love about burlesque is like there's nerdlesque, there's gorelesque, there's like pop culture, there's like classic with the fans. Like you can literally do whatever you want. Like I always say, like if you can imagine it and you can dream it, you can do it. And there's like very few rules, just like as long as you're doing it in a way that's safe and that you're not being offensive and being a bad person, then it's cool. And it's like you really get to let your creativity fly. And yeah, I've gotten to see the scene just like get so big. And like there's this competition that happens in Montreal called the Imperial Burlesque of Canada. And it's the third year that it ran this year. And finally, like last year there was one performer from Alberta. This year there was 3, I think, from Alberta, and which I loved. And the previous 2 years, an American won the Burlesque Monarch of Canada. And this year, my like glitter bestie, Violette Coquette, who's in the show tonight, she is the Monarch of Canada. So she's the first ever Canadian winner. So I feel like that's also putting more stuff on. Because when I travel, people are definitely like, oh, you're from Canada? Toronto? Vancouver? Montreal? It's like, no. They're like, is there anything else? I was like, oh, yeah, there's a lot. And the Alberta scene is great. Like, it's so cool. And like Calgary has such a good scene. And like, yeah, it's awesome.
And what advice would you have for aspiring performers?
Honestly, just do it. Like, I teach beginner classes and whatnot, and I love watching people sort of like have those aha moments. And I saw this really great thing that Matt Finish, who's a great performer, I think is in Arizona, don't quote me on that one, from the States, and wrote that watching burlesque is watching that performer fall in love with themselves. And so watching them just sort of like do it and just have that moment they're like, I'm doing it. And like feeling so good about the audience, like they're told to cheer when they like something, so the audience is like losing their minds and loving it when they like shake or do little winks and things like that. And it's so awesome. So it's like, it's really just like, do it. And the other thing I say to them too is, because burlesque is a DIY art form, like there's no sort of like central thing, there's no like, oh, I went to my burlesque BFA class. Like, it's still super DIY, and the information gets passed on through like performers. And it's cool too, because like, such a tangent. But now there's a little less of a stigma around it. Like my grandmother was a burlesque performer in the at the CNE in the girly shows in the tents, and I didn't know that until unfortunately after she passed. And I got to see some photos of her, but like wasn't really talked about in my family, which I was like, such a bummer. And like I wasn't a performer at that time either, so it's one of those things where it's like I can't connect with her, but from hearing other people's stories I can. But anyway, so the history and everything gets passed along, and I always tell students, create something that is so you, that you like and you're interested in, because there will be at least one other person in the audience that's like, I feel so seen. Me too. Like, there's this great performer here called River Strips, and River does this great act to, she blinded me with science and does an actual like science experiment in the act, because River is a scientist in real life, and so it's like brings that to it. It's so cool. Like you can literally do whatever, and there will be at least one person that's like, me too, and it's so great.
That's amazing for not only the performer to get to share that part of themselves, but also I think most people have been in a position where they've watched something or read something or seen some piece of art and been like, oh, wow, me too, like had that moment. And you really do feel seen and accepted and like heard. And sometimes it's like a lot easier for someone else to say it for you than for you to say it yourself. So I'm sure that has like a huge impact on people moving forward throughout their lives as well.
Totally. We also live in a world where people feel the need to have negative comments on other people's appearances. And I did this act once where I ended up like tight lacing myself in my corset on stage, and I had these like measuring tapes, and then I like broke free of the measuring tapes, and then I carry some extra weight in my stomach, and so I like hit my stomach so it jiggled in time with the music. And then like I have the classic like most people do where it's like, you know, like, are you waving goodbye up here and down here? So I played with that and jiggled that and like just let everything just jiggle. And I had so many audience members come up to me afterwards and be like, I have these scars and like I have this and I have that and you made me feel okay. And I was like, that's awesome. You should like, it's like I said, like things that people think are imperfections aren't imperfections. That's just you and that's just your body. And like, that's one of the things I like about it. Like there's that thing where it's like, how to get a burlesque body, just do burlesque with your body. There's performers of so many different sizes, abilities. Like there's a whole festival called Disabilities, and it's all performers with disabilities. Like it's so cool.
That's so empowering, I think, especially nowadays with like social media and the constant like comparison between how someone else does something or how someone else looks versus yourself, and like exactly what you're talking about. In order to, you know, do burlesque, or in order to have a certain, I don't even know, like your body is perfect the way that it is. And I think having representation in everything, in all aspects of like art and the world, it would just be so much happier of a place.
Oh, totally, because otherwise, what are you looking at?
Exactly. Like if everything's fake at that point, what is, like, I don't know, it's just disheartening.
Like the Rockettes are great. There can be other things.
Agreed. And so kind of on that, I think that when it comes to performance, sometimes people don't always understand all the work and all the aspects kind of that go into it. We saw before you were like running tech issues and like doing your hair and makeup. What are some things that people who don't perform don't understand?
Well, sometimes I get people being like, I really want to do burlesque. Who gives you the costume? And sometimes when you do troops, yeah, like when you do Capital City Burlesque, like Kim, who runs it, is so genius, and she has like this whole like just store of costumes and in all different sizes, and she outfits everyone. But when you do like solo burlesque, because House of Hush Burlesque, which is my company, yes, we are a troupe, but we hire independent contractors, so it's sort of put together, and each performer is very much responsible for their own performances, unless we're doing a group number. And so when you're doing it, like you have to like either find or make or commission your own costume. Like I spend hours rhinestoning things. You have to create your own choreography unless you're going to pay someone to do it for you. So sometimes people are like, what's the shortcut to being good at burlesque? I'm like, if you find it, you let me know. Because I only know working for hours and hours and hours and figuring it out and thinking about what are my hands doing and thinking about what is my face doing and everything else. So it's a lot of work. It's sort of like the thing is burlesque usually sells this like effortlessness to it. It's funny getting ready in the bathroom because one time this audience member saw me waiting for a bus after a show years ago. He's like, you wrecked my whole image. I thought you had like someone to drive you around. And I was like, I do. It's the bus driver. I'm a regular human being. And there are those performers who like are fancy in real life and rich. Those are not in Alberta. So I think it's like it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of investment in everything. But I just think it's so worth it. And then also like the more you can sort of like jack of all trades yourself, the better. Because like for me, I was like, well, I could wait to get cast in things, or I could just start creating my own shows. And then just sort of figuring that out. And sometimes with shows, you don't have a tech person, which is why I come in early and plug things in and do all this extra stuff. And it was a lot of me just figuring out how to do everything. And yeah, it's a lot of work.
You're wearing a lot of hats. Speaking of all the hats, you're also the owner of the company, House of Hush. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, I'm actually the co-founder and co-owner with Violette Coquette, the monarch of Canada, currently, Imperial Burlesque. So it started because we both really like have a drive to be like professional performers and have it be like how we make our money. And so we realized really quickly that corporate gigs hire like troops and groups more than they would hire individuals. So we originally thought, great, let's fake a troupe to get bookings and money. And then through doing that, it just became a real troupe. it just sort of rolled into that. And yeah, and it was like, it's a funny like growing up thing. Like we have these like very wonderful like cast and crew policies and all these things now. But our mandate is that everyone deserves delight and everyone deserves escapism. And so all of our shows sort of link right back to that. And they can be a variety of different things. Like we do like a burlesque version of the Nutcracker. We do burlesque plays at Fringe. That was wild. Anyways, there's shows like this one, Beerlesque, where it's like beer tasting, and then it pairs with the or with the performer. So it's like, like this one is like, it's the saucy spiked cranberry sour. Here's the description of it, and now here's this performer, and then that act is spicy, and sour. We do corporate gigs. We perform with jazz bands. There's a really great performer in town, Tiff Hall, who's actually the MC tonight. She has stepped in last minute. But she's also this great musician, and like I'll do a show with her where she plays the accordion and sings pop songs on her accordion, and the burlesque dancers dance to them. She's amazing. So like we just sort of do whatever sort of fits into the mandate of delight and escapism.
I love it. That's so much fun. Must be never a dull moment and always like very interesting.
It is. It's really fun, and like my mind like runs a bunch, and a lot of my ideas come from like, it would be so weird. It'd be so fun. It'd be wild, and then
you make your own dreams come true.
Exactly.
I love it. And so leading up to a show, what does your day look like?
Well, I learned the hard way today that I need to stop not working other gigs during the day. But usually, depending, I set my hair in the little like pool noodles early in the day, and make sure like showered and everything like that, and like make sure everything's in my bag, double check everything. Sometimes when I'm considerably worried, I have like checklists for costumes. Making sure like the tech and everything's rolling if I'm in charge of the tech. And then, showing up, usually as the producer, gig lead, showing up usually a half hour before everyone else shows up to make sure everything's running smoothly, signs are up, everything's running. And then, and then it's just making sure the performers are comfortable, they know what's going on, checking in with the venue, and then just doing the show, chatting with audience members. My favorite is when audience members get really excited, and then I love just being like, thank you so much for being so great, and then just chatting away with them, and then promptly crashing when I get home.
A wild, crazy night of sleeping?
Yes.
Sometimes those are the best, though, after a long day. That's what you need. And so how long prior to a show are you rehearsing? Like, how long is the rehearsal process?
It depends. Like for Fringe, we start the group number rehearsals, in May, with Fringe being in August. For my solos, it depends. Like tonight, you are seeing one of my oldest solos that I started doing, I think like 12 years ago, maybe 11. It is a tongue ballet, where I was booked for this holiday show when I was a newer performer, and an audience member was like, I don't know what to do. And they're like, what I want for Christmas is for you to shake your tongue around a lot. And I was like, oh, sure, like a tongue ballet. Oh, and so I've made this Nutcracker sort of very silly, absurd thing. And I do it every year. So I'm doing that, but in like a roving form. So this is at Campio. It's a roving show because there's no stage. So stage versus roving. And then I'm doing another act that I've done before, and it's like a longer version of my act from the Nutcracker. I'm the peppermint in the Nutcracker. So it's a longer version of that, and roving as well, and without my massive peppermint prop. I probably did not rehearse the ballet act as much as I probably should have. I probably only rehearsed it for about like 10 hours over the last couple weeks, but it's mainly just because I've done it every year for like 11 years, so it's I can't hear that music and not like feel it. So it just sort of depends. Newer solos usually like, I don't know, almost 100 hours of practicing and getting used to the music, and even just like listening to the music. I like to know the music so that I can mouth trumpet the backtrack of it so that I can perfectly hit the little like accenting. Sometimes I don't know the words to my songs, and people will be like, oh, do you like, you probably can sing this song off by heart. I was like, no, but the music is going doo 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 boo doo 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 boo, and like yeah, it's a weird thing that I do, but I know it that well.
Wow. That's amazing. Songs must be stuck in your head all the time. Well, the music portion of them, at least.
It's wild. Like, when I hear songs when I'm out and about, like, sometimes I just, like, I can feel my body starting to, like, do some choreo, and I'm like, oh, gosh, I've become my father, dancing in public.
Do you have a preference, like roaming shows versus, like, staged shows?
They're both really different. I like roving because it's, like, you get to be so close to the audience, and sometimes when I'm feeling like cheeky or saucy, I'll like crawl onto the table or just really get into their face. I always ask permission first if I'm getting really into their space. One time here at Campio, I was like sitting on a table, and this like human was just having the nicest time, and I was like, excuse me, do you mind if I put my feet up on you? Thinking that he'd be like, no. And he's like, oh, do. And so I literally just like crossed my feet and like put them right on his shoulder, and then like sat back, and like I was like, this is the most absurd thing. And I was like, I am an adult and I'm putting my feet on someone. But I was like, he was fine with it. I always check with the audience before I do that, and if they say no, I'm like, that's fine, no worries, not mad. But yeah, I like it because you get to like interact a lot more. It's more playful. But I do like the stage because the audience can see you the whole time, so it's like you almost have to be more intentional with the movements. They're just very, very different. My favorite is when you can hybrid, but very few venues you can hybrid. Because usually when it's a stage, it's like, yeah, you can get off that stage. It's going to be hard, though.
Yeah.
Like at the Varscona, like, yeah, I can get off the stage, but in not the gracefulest way.
No, definitely not. But I mean, you can try.
Sure, I could try. I could also fall down in the audience. We'll see.
Yes, one of the two. There's no real in between.
Yeah.
And so what would you say makes a good performer?
I always think good performers are performers that are constantly like growing and pushing themselves. It's hard when you get like that burst of like attention and like accolades, and then you're like, great, I've got it. And then that's it. Like one of my favorite playwrights, Kevin Kerr, says a play's never finished, it's just abandoned. And I like to look at that in all aspects of art where it's like, I need to keep working, I need to keep taking workshops. I need to keep like watching. I love watching other shows. I love watching other performers. I love being like, oh, how are they doing that? So like that ability to just keep growing, and then that ability to be present, I think. Because I think with burlesque is sometimes people will say to me like, oh, I really want to do burlesque, but like I'm not a dancer. And I was like, there's performers that I would not describe as dancers. Like their acts are these like wonderful acts where like they'll pose and they'll walk and they'll strut and like whatnot, but it's not what outside people would look at as dancing. Spoiler alert, it's still dancing. But you don't have to be like 5, 6, 7, 8 and dance to do it. So yeah, I don't need someone to dance. I just want them to be present, keep working on being better, and just be an absolute delight to work with. I know that sounds really silly, but like if you play well with others, it's awesome. And not everyone can.
Well, that's definitely for sure. It's always better to be kind and polite and be good on and off stage, I would say, like having those abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so on the topic of good performers, good trait, I would say, of performers is being able to like bounce back, you know, and because sometimes you have a bad day or a hard character, something difficult to portray, or a day where maybe you don't want to get out of bed. So yeah. Do you have any tips or tricks, or what kind of helps you when you're in a difficult mindset?
I just try to sort of like leave things at the door and shake it off. Like one time, I was doing this show at Fort Edmonton Park, and my father died the night before we opened. And I found out that night. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh. And people were like, well, you don't have to come do the show. And I was like, but I'm in all the, like, this is one of those shows where it's like, it's group numbers, it's all this stuff. I was like, also, I'm the technical director. I am the lighting designer. I have the sound. Like, I was like, I have to go. And so I just ran my solo a few times. And it was kind of tough because it was all this about this play about, like, women who blaze trails. And I was dancing, my solo was dancing as Laura Secord because she's from Niagara, where I am from, and my dad used to take me on her hike through the escarpment, and we would go to her homestead and whatnot. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so hard. But like in a way, it was like I kind of got to honor him, and I managed to do it in a way that was like safe, and I was not having an emotional time. Well, I mean, I was having an emotional time, but not like a breakdown time. So that was probably the most like shake it off and keep going, because it's like the audience. I also was like, the audience bought their tickets, it's sold out, they deserve to see the show and see the show properly. So it was that sort of thing. And then also, I guess with performers too, where like if you're really in a space where like you can't go on, be real and honest about it. Like sometimes people are like, I have to share my pain, but if you're not in a space to safely share, then the audience will sense that you're not safe, and then it's just a bad experience for everyone. I do an act that's like super inspired by like a tragedy that happened to me, and it was one of those things where I kept being like, I'm fine, and then Smile by Nat King Cole came on, and I started laughing, and people were like, oh no, what's wrong? And I was like, that's how I feel. I'm just smiling and telling everyone I'm fine. This would be a great burlesque act. And then I waited like 4 years till I had emotional space. And then I do that as an act where I'm a clown and I'm trying to convince the audience that I'm so happy, but I'm so sad. And it's this really nice thing that now I get audience members like talking about like the catharsis they feel when they watch it. But yeah, I always tell performers, like, if you're not in a space to perform and you don't want to push through, you can't push through, don't take care of yourself. Like, there will always be other shows, there will always be other things, but like, it's not worth like putting yourself at risk emotionally, mentally, or physically.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry about that, but
oh yeah, as I was saying it, I was like, this is heavy.
That and multiple other things I would say are challenges when it comes to being a performer. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of the work that you do?
Probably that it's like, it's a lot of work, and people don't always understand that. So sometimes they'll be like, oh, do you want to come do this event? I'll pay you $10. And I'm like, oh, no. And they're like, but it's what you love. It's so fun. I was like, yeah, it is fun. I do love it. But it's also my job. So it's that kind of remembering, like, it's my job. And even though it's like, yeah, I would love to do all these events, I still do like a couple charity events every year, but it has to be a charity that I believe in, and the charity is not like someone's brother's birthday. But yeah, like, I think that's sort of like the tough thing is like knowing your worth and knowing your boundaries.
For sure. And how would you say sorry, I'm trying to think of how to word this. What was the experience like from going from doing something as a hobby, like for fun, to turning it into something where you're making money off of it?
I mean, I always, from the beginning of doing burlesque, wanted to make money with it. I originally thought it would be a good supplement to me being an actor, and now I do very little theater, and I'm mostly just burlesque. And it is tough, like when people ask you what your rates are, and then asking for a rate, like it's so funny because you can also say a rate to one person and they'll act like you've just said like the largest number, and then you'll say the rate to someone else and they'll be like, oh yeah, sure, almost immediately. I was like, oh, it was too low. so it's that sort of like budgeting thing. Like really early on, I realized that I needed to make burlesque also pay for itself. So I started taking half of my income from burlesque and putting it aside. And then I could have new costumes and I could have new things from that money. And that's how I learned that it was quickly becoming my like part-time job from there. And then it's just sort of grown. But yeah, it's tough when you're like, yeah, I love it, but I need to eat.
Absolutely. It's hard for people, I think, to understand that sometimes, especially with the arts. But it's like, yeah, it's entertainment and it's fun and it's great and it's amazing. But like you said, the artists need to eat and live and pay rent and all that jazz. So on the flip side of challenges, what would you say is the most rewarding part of the work that you do?
I mean, the fact that I am a 39-year-old woman and I get to dress like a overblown ballerina or like a very like fancy flapper lady or like a ghost of Peggy's Cove, like I get to, or a witch from like Macker's, like I get to play around and do so many different things. I get to wear these like wildly magical costumes, and yeah, it's really just like when the audience like screams and yells and cheers, like it's that thing where it's like, I know that I'm making people happy. But yeah, I definitely have moments where I was like, I'm a full adult dancing like a unicorn right now. And this is my job.
Oh, that's so much fun. I love that. Yeah. And so last question, it doesn't have to be like burlesque specific or performance specific, but what would you say is the best piece of advice you've received throughout your life?
I think one of my favorite pieces, there's two. One is sometimes you have to say hard no's in order to say healthy yeses later. And the second one that is one of my very favorites, it just went out of my brain. Second one, hard nose. And I learned this one from theater school. Your resume and your accolades can be amazing, but if your reputation does not say plays well with others, people will tire of you. And so I try to be the sort of person that I would want to hire and I would want to be around, and that sometimes you have to set up those boundaries and say no in order to say some really satisfying yeses later.
I think that's really great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone! There we go.
Hello.
Hey everyone!
It's so cold.
It's very cold outside. But we just finished up at Campio for the Beerlesque show, and oh my gosh, it was so much fun.
So good.
If you ever get a chance to see House of Hush, go. All the performers were so incredible. I didn't even.
And
was
so
the food good?
different.
The food was pretty good, yeah.
The food was really good, but all the dancers are so good, but so like different, and you can
Words are hard.
unique in their own way. It was great. Loved it.
So talented. Now we're inspired.
I realized I didn't know what burlesque was until now, but I was delightfully surprised.
Yeah, no, it's great.
So check it out.